The murder investigation of 4 University of Idaho college students seemingly stuck in neutral. No publicly known suspects or motive, and every week, questions outweigh answers.
This is a complex case.
Despite the public's impression, Moscow Police Chief James Fry says there is, in fact, movement in the case. He just can't talk about it.
Is there anything new in the investigation?
What I can tell you is this case is not going cold. We're still receiving hundreds of tips daily. We are following up on those tips. We're still building that picture.
Police say one of those pieces.
So what do you guys think of this idea that we're making progress based on we getting 100 tips daily? That definitely doesn't inspire confidence. How are you making progress in this case? We'll be getting hundreds of tips daily. It does say, I think, something about we're building the case. Let's go back to that.
Still building that picture.
Police.
So they are building that picture. And now let's go on to something else I want to draw your attention to. Hey, guys, good to see you. I want to try and sort of get going with what I mean to say. So forgive me if I stick to my brief for a while, and then I'll sort of address you guys. So the second thing I want to deal with in terms of progress of this case is an interview from former FBI Special Agent Maureen O'Connell. She was interviewed on Fox News 2 days ago. And she actually went to Moscow, spoke to the law enforcement there. So this is law enforcement talking to law enforcement and then talking to the media, not a reporter talking to law enforcement or, you know, the media talking to law enforcement. It's really fascinating to hear what she says as an FBI agent. I don't know if she's part of that 60-strong FBI agent team that's affiliated. I don't think she is, but it's interesting what she says about that. Let's listen in. So bear in mind, she's gone to Moscow and she's spoken to law enforcement in Moscow, right? Okay, so I've muted YouTube so that I can, okay, so let's unmute it. Hopefully that works.
Happening right now. There are some things that are slowing things down. For example, finals were Friday night, so the whole town is pretty much empty. And in order to have an in-person interview or, you know, talk to someone again, normally the cops would just go out right to their house and bring them in and talk to them. But in this particular instance, they're having to send leads to either FBI offices or to local police departments throughout the country where these.
So just to put things in perspective, the student community is totally shut down there, right? That's not news. The university is likely to open again on the 11th of January, right? So on the one hand, she's saying what is actually likely to cause a delay here is if they want to talk to someone, if they want to re-interview someone, even if they want to interrogate someone, well, they've got to go sort of out of Moscow to do that. They've got to ask someone to do something, right? And they're saying that could cause a delay. I actually see a lot of opportunity in the fact that everyone's not around. It in a way allows for a simplification for the authorities of the whole fabric. They can sort of look around and get a sense of what's not there, and if you know what I'm saying. In other words, it's a way of acknowledging we are in the dark. All the students are gone. Someone in this community did this, but everyone is now gone. So who did that? It's a little bit like when you go into the desert, what do you see? Well, there's nothing there, but actually you take yourself into that. And it's the same kind of thing. The student community now is like a desert, and you need to take what you know, your experience as a true crime, as a crime fighter, as a detective, and now start seeing what isn't there. What was there isn't there now, right? And in terms of that, she now brings up something to do with the invisible, that invisible world, that darkness that I was referring to. She brings that up in the next part. Again, bear in mind, this agent has been to Moscow, and she's spoken to law enforcement as well. So what she's going to be telling you now is a kind of an inside track to not only what's delaying the case, but specifically, besides the kids not being there, specifically from an evidence collection perspective, what is delaying the case? What are they looking at? Why is it so hard to look at? Let's have a listen.
Kids, went home for the holidays. So there are a lot of things that are causing this thing to slow down, and a lot of them have also to do with the forensic evidence that they took into custody. Apparently, this evidence was actually layered, which is very difficult to work with and pull apart. And
so I want to just pause there and just emphasize and repeat what she said. What makes the evidence collection and the evidence testing so difficult is it's layered. It's not just a piece of evidence that's on its own. It's sort of embedded in other evidence. It's within a bedrock, in a way, of other noise, and it's difficult to sort of separate that evidence and get to what you're looking for, right? We're going to come back to her saying this, but let's listen into how she elaborates on this difficult to decipher layered evidence.
And put into its own little bucket where, for example, if the shoe impressions with snow and dirt and rocks and blood all have to be separated out and, tested. So there are just so many moving parts, but them working in the going in the right direction meant a lot to me.
Okay. And from there, we're going to go back to Brian Enton. And I did start yesterday's show with this footage, right? It's not that I don't know that I did that, but we're going to go through this footage again, but thinking about it in a totally different way. And so that sort of brings up what I said about in the poll. Make sure if you vote if you haven't before. So I'm going to pose the question again, and then I'm going to address the answer after we've watched this footage. So if you haven't voted, you might want to watch this footage, thinking about the question, and then vote. How should you look for a ghost? How should you look for something in the dark, something that you can't see, something that is in a medium that you're not really used to? Should you just pay additional attention? Should you just try to focus even harder? Should you try and pay attention to the details? You're looking in the dark, but should you try and just pay attention? Should you try and allow your eyes to adjust to the dark? I mean, where are we now? 38 days later? Should you just try and, I'm just trying to adjust to maybe I need to look at the maps a bit closer. Or do you need to think or see in a different dimension? Is the problem that you're not paying attention, or you're not really focused enough on the details, or that you're not familiar enough with what you do know, or do you need to think in a totally different way? So it's interesting, 15%, the least of you say pay attention to the details. 22% say pay attention. 33%, so far the most of you say allow your eyes to adjust to the dark. Just give it more time, the answers will come to you. And then 30% just behind that say, think in a different dimension, right? So let's go to Brian Enton. And let's watch that. Let's have a look at that footage again. I'm going to put it in full screen mode. And what I want you to do when we look at this is I want you not to look at this as two CSIs heading to this house on whatever day, 37, 38. I want you to think about it as an analogy. So instead of them going on a particular date in December into this house, which is empty, I want you to imagine that this is kind of an analogy for the killer going into the house. So in other words, what you're seeing here is two CSIs in broad daylight, going to the house, going through the front door, spending 20 minutes inside and coming out. While you're watching this, what I want you to think about is the circumstances overlaid of this, but in your mind, of the killer going to the house at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning, and how does that look different to what we're seeing here, right? So that's the thought process. That's the layer of perception that I want you to overlay while you're watching this. Do you guys understand? Okay, so let's watch.
We're all locked back up again.
So let's pause it on there for a moment. In this live stream, what I really want to challenge you guys with and bring our thinking sort of in line with is, how should we look at something in true crime and also kind of in general? How should we approach something? How, in what sort of way do we sort of think about things, right? And one of the big discrepancies in this footage to the actual night of the, well, let me ask you the question. What do you think is the biggest discrepancy, other than the obvious that the victims weren't inside now and all of that kind of thing? What do you think is the most obvious discrepancy between this footage of them going in and coming out, and if you were actually there, if you were actually sitting in front of the crime scene, you were sitting literally in a chair, and the perpetrator passed by, almost brushed your elbow on his way in and then came out? What do you think is the main discrepancy between what we can clearly see here and what happened that night? What do you guys think? That's a good answer. Day versus night. Darkness here. Time of day. That's also a good answer. Emily says the perpetrator knew where the beds were. Do you think these investigators going into the house know what they're looking for? Like, they know also where the beds are, they know the layout, they were told where to go, they sort of went there. In other words, they're going there in a premeditated sense. Guys, go in, you need to go to the first floor, then turn right, and then, here's a kind of a map of the house, you need to go over there. Do you think they are going in with a premeditated plan, right? They're carrying the tools of the trade. Okay. Doors not locked, intent, cold, people around, the crime happened in total darkness. The answer that I'm looking for is, what this footage doesn't show is the 20 minutes when they were inside. So in other words, you see them go in, and then it sort of cuts, through the front door, and then it sort of cuts to them coming out the front door. And it's like, okay, well, that's not actually what happened. What happened was they went in, and then the most important thing that should be in this report is, what were they doing inside? You don't see that. We've heard that they were inside for 20 minutes. We heard that they were on the second floor, presumably in Ethan and Xana's room. But that's invisible. That's unknown. That's simply what we don't know, right? In terms of specifically what were they doing and all that kind of thing. So what I'm trying to do through that little analogy is show you how you need to think in a different dimension in order to know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know by simply looking at the photographic dimension. You simply go, oh, I see them going in, they're coming out. Okay, it's not, they're going in the day, but this is at night. What are you not seeing? So you don't see what you're not seeing by simply looking at what you're not seeing. You've got kind of got to come through it through a different angle. It's a little bit like you are in the forest, like in the one Hobbit story, and they get lost. And then you need to come out the canopy of the forest and be able to look over the forest, and you see, well, there's a peak over there. Oh, this is where I am. We need to do the same in this case. But how do you do that? How do you come out of the fabric, come through the forest, and know where to look and know what to look for? And in a way, it's the same sort of thing. How do you look for a ghost in the darkness when you're already lost in the darkness? Like, how do you look for something in the forest when you are lost in the trees? And the thing that you're looking for is actually hiding and has got the edge on you because he's in that forest and knows it better than you do. So how do you start? What's the first step you need to take to see this thing that you can't see, right? And the answer is you need to think or see in a different dimension. I see that has got the second amount of votes here. You don't just try and pay more attention, although that is important in investigations. You don't fixate on the details, although details matter. You don't just try and wait until you become more familiar with what's going on. Let me read the case files. What you try and do in a situation like this is you think in a different dimension. You think in a totally different way. You try and see in a totally different way. In other words, the way that we tend to see is, when you read a book, you see the words on the piece of paper, right? When you see me on the screen, you're seeing me in the photographic dimension, just in the plain sight, natural way. How do you see beyond that way? How do you think beyond what is kind of in front of you? That's what I want to discuss in this analysis. And that agent has just given us a vital clue to precisely how to do that. How do we see in how are the investigators seeing in a dimension that we're not familiar with, that is a different dimension? How do we do that? Did any of you catch that? Did any of you catch the gist of kind of what you were saying in that respect? Do you want me to play it again? Is Cotton Star here? I think I saw his name. Mel says go back and look at it as a newcomer. I'm not really talking about it like that. Jennifer says you can try and think like the killer. Yes, because that's the dimension of the psychology. That is the criminal psychology. That's certainly one dimension. We've already kind of explored that, but that isn't an invisible dimension that begins to illuminate our killer as well. So that's true. Yvonne says imagine possibilities and probabilities. So scenario building. That's not really. You need to activate your intuition and your imagination, very important, but it's not really seeing something that is right in front of you, but seeing it out of the plain sight, line of sight, photographic dimension, right? So it's almost like if you take a photo of something and then that still doesn't show you what you want to see, well, how do you then see what the photo doesn't show you, right? There is something there, but you can't see it. It's not captured in the photo. So how do you see that? How do you get to some other dimension that allows you to see that? Trippy says a paradigm shift. Where the wind blows says be aware of your surroundings. Okay. There you go. That's starting to touch on it, right? That's starting to touch on it. So let me play back what the agent said, and it's gonna. I just want to highlight the most important aspect there.
Rocks and blood all have to be separated out and tested. So there are just so many moving parts, but its own little bucket where, for example, if you the shoe impressions.
Shoe impressions. Did you catch that? Shoe impressions. If you take a photo, you're going to see shoe impressions. Well, you might, but have we seen any shoe impressions in any of the media footage? Has there been a photo of a shoe impression anywhere? Why is she talking about shoe impressions? Why do you think this FBI agent who went there, who spoke to law enforcement, is talking about shoe impressions? And she's not saying necessarily shoe prints, but shoe impressions. Does she mean outside or inside, or both? Found in Florida says use your other senses. That's quite a good answer. So can you use smell? What do you think? Can you use hearing? What do you think? Can you use sight, but in a different way? Connie says, I've been wondering whether they have any shoe impressions. Okay. Okay. Let's have a look at the poll, and then I'm going to go back to my script. So 21% say pay attention, 17% devils in the detail, allow the eyes to adjust. Most of you are saying that. Okay. Have you guys seen this image before? Have you seen this picture? Anyone seen this before? Can you read what it says there? Saturdays are for the girls. That's inside the window. And I've said before that you can quite clearly see inside these rooms because the windows are so big. So there it says Saturdays are for the girls, and there's a upstairs bedroom that is, the blinds are open, so you can see inside that. In that one, they appear to be closed. I'm not sure if I'm seeing it right, but that window appears to be closed. The blinds, whatever. So there is a place and there's a point to paying more attention and paying attention to detail. But that's not why they can't figure out what's going on in this case. That's not why we are in this place of there's a ghost in the darkness. That's not because we are not looking in the plain sight aspect with enough focus. We almost over-focused on elantras and 4 individuals passing in the dark, and everything that passes our focus, we fixate on. If it's a white vehicle over there, let's fixate on that white vehicle. Do you think that's going to help you find the killer? Do you think that approach, look at that white vehicle there, how about that one there? Do you think that's going to really give you progress? Or is another approach going to work? Another perspective. So in this image, you can see the footprints of the vehicles that used to be there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? And that's really what I want to deal with in this, is not looking at something obvious like a white Elantra, like a vehicle, or someone caught on CCTV camera, or something that you can obviously hear. What did you tell Adam? Not something that is obvious that everyone is thinking about. The thing that's not obvious, the thing that's subtle, the thing that is in the darkness, but no one can really see it. So let me ask you kind of a general question before we get to the gist of this. Do you think the crime scene is mostly outside the house? Do you think there's mostly evidence outside? Have you guys seen CSIs with gloves and shoe covers and test tubes on the outside? And for example, those guys who arrived yesterday that Brian Enton caught, did they sort of hang around outside the house? Did you see them sort of testing with cotton buds and things sort of on the windowsills outside the house? Or in other words, do you think the crime scene is inside the house or outside the house? Not only, I mean, it's a stupid question, but do you think the evidence trail is mostly inside the house or outside? Based on what we've been seeing in the photographic dimension, in the obvious way, what have law enforcement been doing? Where have they been focusing their attention, inside or outside? What do you think they're looking at when they are inside, and why do you think they're wearing these suits? Why not just go in there with sneakers and take a photo? Why is it necessary to do what they're doing? Why is it necessary to wear these gloves and take specialized equipment into this crime scene? Again, is there any residue of the crime scene on the outside? Does it appear as if there has been? So again, in the same way, this is obviously all white. If you invert it and you turn all of this into darkness, how can you see the same way you can see vividly what you see in front of you? You see trees, the perimeter tape, crime scene tape, the wreath, the Christmas wreath on the door, the number of the house. You can see all of these things quite clearly. How can you see what you can't see clearly if you had to put this into the cover of darkness? So what should you do? Just pay more attention, or should you pay attention to the details, or should you allow your eyes to adjust to the light? Do you think that's going to work? It's pitch dark. You can't see what you can't see. Should you just wait till you can? I really like this image. This image, if you could take this vehicle away, is really an iconic image of what we're dealing with. We're dealing with a house that someone described a few moments ago as a step-up pyramid. It sort of goes step by step, kind of in a pyramid, right? And people have asked in the past, how could the killer, so you might say, we can't see in the dark. I don't know what you're talking about. How could the killer see in the dark? Well, the inside of the house wasn't dark. It did have illumination. This light actually wasn't working. So this was dark anyway, which is giving you some insight already into why the killer chose the route that he chose. I'm not sure if that light worked either. But because it was Christmas, you kind of had a lot of these lights in here. I don't know whether that came out at Christmas time or was always there. But this image really captures the sort of facade of, I can't see inside this house. I see the house, I just can't see the inside. I need to get through the dimension of the walls and the door and the windows. Even if I go above it or to the side, I still can't see inside. Why can't I see? What is the thing that I need to see? And so that does raise that question. How do you see in the dark? And the answer is, well, there are definitely a lot of strategies that law enforcement use, but one of them is luminol. You use a particular kind of substance that interacts with things like, I think it's got things that have got a high protein, not sure if it's high protein or sugar, but it interacts with that and it causes it to glow. So things like blood and fruit juice glow once they interact with, for example, luminol. right? So that's kind of an obvious way where you just spray something on and it actually glows in the dark, right? You can also run a black light. I think it's called a black light. You can run that over, right? But that's also actually in the photographic domain. You're just using kind of chemical tricks and light tricks to do that. How do you actually see what you don't know but is there? How do you actually see that? How do you actually see in the dark? How does the ghost emerge out of that darkness, right? In other words, what I'm challenging you guys to do is think in a way differently to see into this invisible world. How do you get out of this place that we're stuck in and see all of this in a totally different way? I think that's true, but it's also protein. Yeah, anything that has protein in it, that's right. I think I know it interacts with fruit juice as well, luminol. So yeah. Some of you say social media. Okay, interesting. Okay, so I think I've prepped you guys for the spiel that I'm going to take you through. So let's get to that spiel. So previously, I've used the analogy of being able to see the woods for the trees. In other words, not get lost in the trees and leaves, but being able to think, and not so much think, but intuit in a way that transcends all the vertical stems and details. Look at this image. How do you find out where you are? We are in the woods of this case. How do you find out? How do you navigate through the woods when you are in a totally different woods? You're unfamiliar with the woods. You're unfamiliar with these people. You've got to get to know them. And as the details accumulate, you eventually find, I'm lost. I've got no idea where I am, and I don't know what to look for. And how do I need to navigate through this, right? That's kind of what we're faced with here. We're being dwarfed by the forest, by the trees. But I've used that analogy, how do you see beyond the trees? In other words, how do you integrate all the details? The details do matter, and then somehow move out of the fabric, right? How do you move out to see what it is, to see what you're dealing with? How do you get through this tangle to where you need to be? And it is important, not just in true crime, but in your life, to be able to do that as well. So you might be saying, this is very cerebral, and it is very cerebral. Why are you wasting our time with this iffy? It's just swirling around the drain of this case, not really taking us anywhere. Actually, I'm going to take you to the shoe prints, but the applicability is also to your personal life. In your life, are you able to know the technique to get through the canopy, to get through the tangle of your circumstances and your emotions and your situation and see where you are? Are you able to do that? And so that's the importance of following the thinking strategy, I guess you can call it, that I'm about to share with you. What I'm going to share with you doesn't just apply to true crime, it applies to you in your life. How you can think about your life, whether it's a difficult situation or just any situation. It's important that you can do that, where you move totally out of it, get a good view, get a perspective. And at the end of the year, Christmas time, the new year, it's a good time to do that. It's also a good time to do it whenever you're overwhelmed, whenever you're struggling. So how do you do that? So, as I say, you try and move through the forest canopy. And what is the point of moving through that canopy? It's to see where you are. If you are lost or overwhelmed or you don't know which way to go, well, then find out where you are. Find an anchor point. Find a peak on the horizon or whatever it is. Find something that gives you context. It might be another milestone in your life. It might be, yeah. Okay. So there's another really simple analogy that's even simpler and profound from the woods versus trees. It's, can you see in the dark? If you are lost, it's like being in the dark. You can actually see if you're lost in a forest, but essentially you are like in the dark. So how do you bring illumination to being lost like that without literally turning on a light? How do you see where you are in the dark without literally turning on a flashlight or kind of using your phone or something? How do you do that? How do you have a light bulb moment as an investigator in this case without reaching for a light bulb or some creator telling you there's been a breakthrough? How do you get to that? What is a light bulb moment? It's a moment of sudden realization, enlightenment, or inspiration. Do you think a light bulb moment involves actual light? Do you think a light bulb moment involves actually seeing the perpetrator, or do you think it's something else? A moment of sudden realization, enlightenment, or inspiration. How do you get there? Okay. So what happens when that happens, when there's a light bulb moment? You see where you're standing, you get perspective, you get proportion and a little context. So the question is, how in this case do we elevate our thinking to achieve that light bulb moment? If we are over here, how do we get to that light bulb moment? Well, the answer is we've got to elevate our thinking, right? We've got to think in a different dimension. How do we do that? And I think it starts with a very simple question, and it's what I'm kind of getting at. How do you see in the dark? So to elevate your thinking, how do you see in the dark? What are ways to see in the dark? And if you look at that image, do you think he's literally in the dark? I mean, he's faced with a muddle of connections, and which thread do you hold on to? How do you make sense of that? So it's not literally seeing in the dark, it's seeing into the unknown. It's knowing from all the chaos and confusion, what is the signal in all of that noise? Well, how do you? And in a way, what you're talking about here is there's this broad spectrum of information. How do you narrow that down to something that is going to start taking you somewhere? Instead of just, oh, well, let's look at that, let's look at that, and it's sort of a chaotic way of thinking as well. How do you think in a systematic way? How do you see in the dark? Well, that is exactly what justice is, seeing in the dark. That's what courts and prosecutors and the entire legal process is, seeing through the dark, trying to see in the dark, seeing hidden things, hidden places, hidden people, hidden motives, people buried and brutalized, and trying to fathom the unknown why out of the deep, out of the dark. That's what the whole purpose is of the legal system, right? It's to bring what is in the darkness to light, bring wrongs and right them. But how do you do that? So right now, where we are in terms of this case, doesn't it feel like we are in a kind of darkness? Where's that image that I like? Doesn't it feel like in this case that we are nowhere, we're in the dark, the killer's on the loose, and we've sort of come up with nothing? Doesn't it feel that way? I like that answer. I like that answer. Also like that. do you think it's accurate to say it feels like this investigation is in the dark? The investigators are in the dark about there's a killer out there, and we're in the dark about who he is, where he is, and why he did whatever he did, right? And do you guys agree that doesn't it feel impossible at this moment? Doesn't it sort of feel, is it even possible to solve this case? Didn't you get that sense? And in terms of that, when you, at the beginning of an investigation, think about the Delphi case, think about the John Benet Ramsey case, think about the Chris Watts case kind of early on, very early on, like on day 1 or day 2. In a lot of cases, you start off with, you are totally, this, and to some extent, even where we are now, the Suzanne Morphew case, there's sort of a sense of, it's impossible to find out what happened here. You know, we just don't know. Does it feel a little like that to you? Does it feel like, is it even possible to find out what happened here? Well, in that respect, I refer to the words of my former president. It always seems impossible until it's done. By the way, when I saw this picture, I actually thought, did someone steal this from me? Because I've stood in this very spot on this mountain. There's a waterfall to the left here. And I've taken a photo. This is obviously taken very early in the morning. I've also done the same thing. I've been in this very spot to take this photo. But there it is. It always seems impossible until it's done. So the answer is that there is an answer, that you can actually see into the darkness, that you can see this ghost. It's not impossible. It is possible. In true crime, we find ourselves at the beginning of cases all the time, and it always seems impossible. We only know that and that. We know the time. And then at the end, when the impossible comes to light, wow, okay, so that's what happened. Do you remember in the Kylie Rodney case? First, it seemed impossible to find a vehicle. Then it seemed impossible to figure out what had happened. Was it? Was it so impossible? It's not impossible if you've got the proper system in place. And so let's get to that now. Let's sort of bring it home. So crime scene investigators are doing exactly that. They're looking into the darkness when they are going sort of into the house, when you see them going in, but not in actual darkness. What are they looking at that is looking into the darkness? Or they're looking into another dimension. So when the two CSIs approached 112 King Road, it was to look into another dimension. What dimension is that? What dimension is that? Like the phantom zone? What dimension do you think it is? The fifth dimension? What dimension do you think that is? See what you guys say. There we go. That's the answer. The microscopic dimension. That's invisible to us. We, by definition, if you take a photo of something, you can't see in the microscopic dimension. You can't see DNA. You can sometimes see skin flakes and things like that, but DNA you can't see, and you certainly cannot, by looking at it with a bare eye, say, oh, that DNA matches that person. It's beyond our sort of ordinary perception, right, to do that. The microscopic dimension is a dimension that we have access to, but it's beyond plain sight. It's a specialized area, but it's an area that is nevertheless crucial to crime scenes all the time. The microscopic dimension deals with DNA, but also microscopic evidence, fibers, hairs, dirt, and of course shoe prints, right? You might say, no, shoe print you can see, not if it's been washed away. So you might, something that has been cleaned away, you might nevertheless find a trace of it. Part of the arc of a shoe, part of the unique configuration of the sole of a shoe in dirt or in whatever, right? Even if you've washed it away, there might be a very faint signature that's left behind. So in other words, what are you doing? You're actually acknowledging that I can't see something. You're acknowledging that when you look at something, you can't see it. So you try to see that thing that you can't see through a different dimension. The one dimension that allows you to do that is the microscopic. Another that allows you to do that is through the chemical dimension. So where you use luminol or whatever. Another one is through false light. For example, using a black light, fluorescent lighting, and all that kind of thing. All of that is trying to assist us to see something that goes beyond the limits of our ability to see. But you can do the same thing with your thinking. You can see in a different dimension as well. So you don't just keep saying, I need to become more familiar with this evidence, or I need to focus more, or I need to pay attention. No, think differently. Think differently. So these technicians came and they're trying to see the invisible, trying to see what we can't see, trying to see something they know is there but can't quite see it yet. And the way we see in an everyday sense, as I say, is in this photographic dimension, our plane in plain sight, in our line of sight, what is in front of us, what is on screen. And we need to practice thinking and seeing just outside of that constant way that we do, because we're stuck. We are stuck seeing things in the same way. That was like the beauty of Vincent van Gogh, is he was able to see the electricity, the energy of the world, similar to Neo in the Matrix. He was seeing the world through computer code, and it's kind of transparent, and everything is information. And it's a totally different mindset to seeing. You don't actually see with your eyes, you're seeing now in a totally different way. You're seeing the fabric in kind of 3 dimensions, almost the way a computer knows data forwards and backwards, inside and out. For example, you can take a book like this and do a computer search for a word, and the computer is able to take you right to that spot in the book, that's dealing with that word. That's targeted searching. You can do the same in true crime. Search in a targeted way for information that's there, but in a way that you're not able to do directly, or if you did, you'd struggle. So let's ask a couple of questions that we don't know the answer to. What are some of the things that we're looking for that aren't in front of us, that are lost in time, and in a timeline we're not quite certain of? Well, for example, what's the time of death in this case? We're still not sure. So if you ask that question, you say, how do we find our way through the darkness of that? And the answer is quite simple. You can, if the victims ate something before they died, you can look at the track of the carbonara, and you can determine how far in the digestive system it moved before it stopped. And that can give you a reasonably accurate assessment of that. I think it's one of the faults of this case that they didn't bring in a coroner much earlier to determine that specific thing. I think that was an error. That's my personal thought. Because one of the biggest insights into any case is the exact time that it occurred, because that's going to help you with alibis and other things. Well, what else? What is the order of the slayings? That's another relative unknown, but we can be quite certain of that based on other things that we know. We know there were 4 individuals. They were on 2 levels in the house, right? And the reason I'm showing you this image is it's almost reducing that house that's so, you've got this sort of blank facade, to something that's smaller and simpler. You can now start seeing inside that house, but through your thinking, through your using technology in a certain way, you're starting to now see everything in a totally different way. The house is now, it stands in a way that's a lot simpler, but that's still not enough. How can we see further into this house? And I tried to do that the other day by showing you guys the house is actually like a transparent box from the perspective of a peeping Tom or something. That is how a way I was trying to adjust your thinking, that you're not seeing the house. You need to see it almost as something that it's not. You can see right through it. And obviously this is not the house, but it's to remind you to try and see it in a different way, that you see all the windows, not the walls, that you see inside from the outside, right? And that's how we begin to turn these question marks into sort of light bulb moments. Are you guys following me, sort of how we're doing it and why that's the case? So that's the thinking strategy, but where does it take you? And so that's where we're going to go right now. In terms of the order of the slayings, we can actually be quite certain of that. We know there were 4 individuals. We know quite a lot about the spider web threads linking them to one another, the dynamics. And so that brings up this particular image. These are, it really took ages and ages to find all of these photos, but these are the forensics teams documenting the scene, right? And I'm going to show you a couple of them. But what they're doing here is in the photographic dimension. Is there a, I don't know, what do you think they're looking for by taking these photos? They're taking photos of the windows. Do you think they're looking for maybe damage to the window? Do you think they're looking for blood stains on the outside of the house? Do you think they found any? But the part that I was interested in is over there. You can see she's wearing protective booties, right? That's quite important. But this was taken, I think, quite early in the investigation. Let me make it sort of a bigger size. Do you see any anything that sort of sticks out on this little apron of what some people call the patio? Did you see anything worth noting here? Do you see any leaves lying around, any dirt lying around, any kind of blood trail here? And it's very hard to find really good photos of this section because most of the photos are taken from below ground level, right? A little bit like sort of these photos. Because it's below the level of that little apron, you don't get to see directly down onto this apron, right? And so this is one of the few photos where you can actually see this apron. And this would be a really good place if there was a blood trail. So let me ask you, do you think they found a blood trail on this apron? That's exactly the point. Yeah, that's exactly the point. So let me ask you a question based on like all of this that we're saying. Would you expect to see a blood trail? So even if one person was knifed to death, wouldn't you expect there to be a blood trail from the inside of the house, out the house, and then eventually disappearing? Yes or no? Even if it was just one victim, wouldn't you expect to see a blood trail? Because someone has knifed someone to death several times. They're standing right next to that person. The blood comes out immediately. They step on the blood, right? It's in the sole of their shoes. It soaks into the material. It soaks into the whatever the sole is, and then that person then leaves abruptly. He doesn't spend a lot of time in the house. He leaves abruptly. Shouldn't he leave a blood trail through the house and out the house, from a bedroom out the front door? Stephanie says no. Okay. What does Jeffrey Richards say? Leah says, I wish there'd been snow that night. They may have found tracks or a trail. On the other hand, if the students came over, as they did, they would have interfered with that. There would have been footprints in the snow, but then that would have been covered over. And that, I think, is giving a little bit of an idea of what the police are actually dealing with anyway. I'm trying to find Jeffrey's brilliant comment. Sorry that I'm delaying the whole thing, but it seems like it's quite important. Still can't find it. I'm going to give it 10 more seconds. Can't find it. Stephanie, can you copy the comment that he made and just add me in it? Then that's one way I can see through the dark of all of these comments. Okay, so do you guys agree that you would actually expect in a situation where there are 4 victims and they were all knifed to death, right? That there should be, I mean, there's kind of like a trail of blood coming out of the one wall. Why is there not a trail of blood from the killer himself going out the front door? See if I can find that particular image. You know which one I'm talking about. That one. If there's so much blood, why is there not a trail of blood coming out the house besides that? So should there be a trail of blood here on this sort of apron, or should there be one here on the apron by the sliding door? So again, from this photographic dimension, they're not really taking you looking down directly on these concrete aprons. So it is really difficult finding photos that show these aprons, but I did find a couple. When you see the CSIs outside, are they looking at these concrete aprons at all? Are they really paying attention to them? So I try to find some photos showing the CSI sort of outside, and you can see someone here removing gloves. She's got gloves on over there, right there at the front door. And that looks like she's paying attention to the ground, but actually, if you watch the full video, she's actually just removing her sort of booties. right? You also notice the crime scene people going in and out right over that platform, that sort of concrete platform. So if the killer did leave anything there, whether by the students who came to the scene because of the survivors or law enforcement or both, all of that evidence has been destroyed. If the killer did arrive through the front door, in terms of the outdoor evidence up to the front door, all of that evidence has gone long ago. It's sort of been trampled by the stampeding in and out that front door of everybody else, right? You guys agree with that? Rosie says he didn't go in that door. Do you agree with Rosie? Do you think that she's right? So then we go slightly around the side of that apron, and you can see there's some interest in this area. The sort of corner area. Could the killer have come from this side, sort of following this line of the crime scene tape, come from this side of the house, this embankment, maybe parked up on the side, and come this way? Could he have left some kind of impression in this, looks like gravel, or in the leaves? Also, could he have picked up some of these leaves and brought them into the house? But then equally, couldn't some of the students? Could he have left tiny leaf fragments in the bedrooms of the crime scene, assuming that those bedrooms remain sequestrated? Don't you think that leaf fragments are maybe some of the best microscopic details that may show where he went? But in terms of inside the bedroom. Stephanie says, the first killed won't be corrupted by other blood from knife, and so the last killed likely had the blood of multiple victims. Yeah, that is brilliant. That is very clever. You had the same thing in the David Bain case, where his socks had multiple victims on them, soaked into his socks. So yeah, you definitely have that situation. In line with that thought is, what is the difference between a shoe print in dirt or whatever and a shoe print in blood? What's the difference? Kind of maybe a silly seeming question, but what's the difference between, oh, I found a shoe print here. Okay, well, here's a shoe print in blood. What's the difference? The difference can be that any shoe print left in blood is the killer's shoe print. And of course, that depends on how contaminated a crime scene is, because if it's contaminated, then it doesn't count. But if the killer killed someone, closed the door, and our impression from the survivors is that they couldn't get into the room, and then they called 911. The person was unconscious and they couldn't get into the room. Well, then there's a very good chance that there's a shoe print left in blood inside the bedroom, right? So a shoe print left in blood is telling you that the killer left that shoe print because he's the only one who had access, and then left that sort of scene, right? It's totally different to any other shoe print. A shoe print left in blood is literally saying, this is the killer. But it's also telling us a lot more. So let's have a look at a couple of other images from that concrete apron. And as I say, they never seem to be photographing anything on the ground here. You never see any photos where they are focused on the ground and look at something. There's an impression of a shoe print in blood on the ground. You never see that. I haven't seen any photos of that. They didn't cordon off this apron with crime scene tape, which I think also suggests that they don't consider it of very much evidentiary value, which may also be a mistake. Because I think one of the biggest insights into this case is the entry and exit of the killer. So in a way, you maybe would have wanted to totally protect the front door area and not allow anyone to go in and out that front door area in an ideal case situation. And then also the sliding door area, cordon that off and not really allow anyone in and out that area. And then, of course, what happens? Law enforcement come and everybody goes in and out that area. But of course, it's not an ideal situation because before even law enforcement got there, the survivors had come in and out, and then their friends had come in and out. So that's adding all of these layers. And how do you take these layers away in a way that's going to be accurate? So if there is an original layer at the bottom, and then there's another layer on top, left behind by various people, traffic moving in and out, can you see how difficult it might be to get to that original if it was laid down? But I don't think that's the case in terms of these concrete aprons on the outside. I think it's actually related to the inside of the house where they are having that difficulty. I think they lost that evidence, if there was any, on these concrete slabs, right? Let's have a look at another one. So if you look at this image, she's concentrating on the window, and maybe she thinks there was a possible damage over there, possibly someone leaning to the window to see if they were sleeping, maybe the fingerprints over here or something. Maybe the killer approached this window to hear sounds of sleeping or whatever. Then there's also, I think this is a better image of the one I showed earlier. You can see this concrete apron's got a crack going through it. Do you think any evidence was left in there? And then this is a tar sort of driveway. There's a bit of dirt over there, but this is a tar driveway. Thanks a lot, Lynn. Thanks. So the advantage of these hard surfaces are that it's kind of an advantage and a disadvantage, or that something that is liquid could potentially be imprinted on the surface, like it's a hard surface, compared to if you were walking on dirt, it might be soaked in it, and because it's so irregular, maybe you wouldn't see it and it would disappear. I do wonder whether they ever ran a sort of a luminol thing over this section, and if they found anything. And also, did they bring, if there were chemical traces left behind and minute blood traces, did dogs find anything like that? The problem, once again, is there was so much traffic going in and out. It's going to make it extremely hard to see through that noise of the killer's tracks, the killer's actual approach, and everybody else's. So should your focus be at the outside exit and entry, the outside entry points, or should you completely forget about, not completely, but should you concentrate your focus on the inside? Here's another image from the outside. Again, she looks like she's photographing the window pane. Thanks, Stacy. Thank you. Yes, some additional activity in front of the door, but I don't think they are looking down at the ground or finding any evidence there. I think they're just reaching for gloves out of a box. That's my impression. Here's another image where they're all standing on that and they're just really putting booties on. But again, you don't get the impression that they regard this apron as of any use from an evidence perspective. One also wonders what this person has got in that bag over there. Is it photographic equipment? Is it some other kind of testing equipment? What is that? So should they be concentrating on this apron in front of the front door, or should they be concentrating on this one? There's a sliding door. Once again, you can see there's lighting on the inside. And if the killer was, I mean, you know, I think if you're asking the question, was the killer a peeping Tom? Let me ask you guys this question, first of all. Do you think the killer was a peeping Tom? Is there anyone who thinks the killer probably wasn't a peeping Tom? Melstiller says both sides, I think. Dover says in a way for sure. So let me put it like this. When the killer approached the house on the night of the murder, so he's got the knife in his hand, presumably, actually presumably not. Would he really approach it with like a knife in his hand blinking, or would he have it in a sheath in his belt attached to him under a jacket? I don't know. But the point being, does he just approach the house without actually looking at the house? I mean, he's in the dark in a way as well, where he doesn't know for sure that they're asleep. So how can he make sure? Well, one way is quite simple. He can look whether all the bedroom windows are in the darkness. That's kind of an obvious one. But another one that's maybe less obvious is he can look inside the house where there are windows like this without curtains across them, and you can actually see inside and see that there's no activity inside. And there are a couple of rooms like that. There is the kitchen that affords a view inside the house. Oh, I can see there's no activity. No one's in the kitchen. They must be asleep in bed. But there are also other windows like that one, where you can see inside from the outside. You can see inside from the outside. Again. That's the one that I wanted. And because it's illuminated on the inside, you can see, well, is there any activity behind that window? And so the killer gets to see in the dark, in his own way, is there anyone that is awake? And while he gets confirmation that all of the windows where there are bedrooms that he needs to go are in darkness. And so I think this one's actually got its light on, unless that's a reflection. And so the coast is clear and he can do what he wants to do. Right? So it's also from the killer's perspective, how can he see in the dark? I mean, how does he know that they're asleep and all of that kind of thing? Part of it's psychology, part of it's also seeing in that sense. Here's another image from the sliding door, and that's one of the best perspectives you get of that sort of apron area. Was there any evidence left in this dirt over here? Was there any of these gravel pieces that's here that came in over there, right? Did the killer, before he entered the house, sort of skulk around the sides? And would that bring in idiosyncratic evidence of any kind? There's, I think, a little stone. Can you guys see that? Okay, I'm in the way now. There's a little stone over there. But the main question is, was any evidence left on here of blood or hair? And I think that brings up another quite interesting thought, is if the killer was in direct contact with 4 victims, you wouldn't only have blood evidence, which is quite obvious. You wouldn't only have, it's almost like that he would be covered in red paint, almost from head to toe. You wouldn't only have that situation, you'd also have hair. You would have hair that is part of hair fragments would be possibly on his hands, possibly on his knees, possibly on his shoulders or whatever. If he picked up any of the victims, if he moved any of the victims, if he leaned into any of the victims to say something, whatever, all of that could have led to hairs getting onto him. And that's then besides the clothing fibers that he transfers to the blankets. Remember, they were all murdered in their beds. Thanks a lot, JL. Thanks. That's beside the hair fragments, and that's beside the him transferring, so it's not just DNA, it's also transferring his clothing fibers onto the bedding, and also the bedding fibers onto him, right? There's that as well. I'm just trying to think of anything besides that. So it's hair, clothing fibers, bedding fibers, leaf fragments, and maybe to some extent gravel or pieces of stone that have caught between the soles of his feet, the grooves in shoes, caught in there and then released during the exertions inside the room. Can have all of that, and all of that's on a microscopic level. Yeah, the linen. Here is another close-up image from that sliding door. Can you see how it actually seems like those lights were on day and night? These overhead lights were on day and night, and allowed the killer possibly to look inside. And then here's another close-up of this. You don't see this very often. You've got a close-up of the concrete apron, and then there's also kind of a mat over here. There's a mat with, looks like a little bit of leaves over there. But do you think the crime scene technicians found any blood spatter or anything over here in this area? Do you think they found any fingerprints over here? Or do you think other students may have used this as their entry point or exit point? And that sort of immediately raises another question. Did the killer use gloves? Did the killer leave fingerprints behind, or did the killer use gloves? Yeah, there were no evidence markers. Here is another photo from that perspective of the sliding door. And again, you can see how it's illuminated on the inside. Even in the day, there's some of those light bulbs on the outside along this wall. You can see one over there. There's another one over there. And you can't really see this apron very well. But do you think there was any evidence left over here? Do you think this door was left open, left unlocked? Thanks a lot, Delphi Primetime. Thanks a lot. You're welcome, Delphi. You're welcome. Thank you. And let's go on to the next image. So this is what they seem to be focusing on. They seem to be focusing on the windows. So there's some crime scene tape. I'm not quite sure what that refers to. There's another light bulb. You can actually see how they are really focusing on this window. Did the killer look through this window? Did he touch this window? Does this window give line of sight for the killer into Xano Ethan's bedroom? Did the killer pause at this window to see if he could see into their bedroom first? Magic says the killer almost certainly wore gloves. And I think that raises quite an interesting question, which you might think is simple, but I'm not sure if it is. if you wear gloves holding on to a knife and the knife gets wet, is your grip going to be better or worse than if you aren't wearing gloves? You might say, no, it would definitely be better. But the thing is, when you are, you can almost compare that to wearing socks on flip-flops and your feet get wet, your shoes get wet. Is it going to be easier to feel something slipping if you've got your bare skin or not? I think it's quite a kind of a difficult question, but either way, there is going to be slipping. And I do think if he does have gloves on, the likelihood that he cut himself with incidental cuts would be a lot less. But the other argument is he may get a little bit lost knowing exactly where the glove is in his hand. If the glove's wet and the sheath of the knife is wet as well, it's kind of like doubly slippery. Whereas if your hand is wet, you can kind of brush it off on your shirt because you know your hand's wet because you can feel it. You can feel that warm blood on your hand. Whereas if it's in a glove, you may not actually know how wet the glove is in the dark, right? Does that make sense? And that does raise the issue, did the killer get confused in the dark with the glove on about what was going on, and then that led to him cutting himself? But I think either way, he did cut himself, which is good news in terms of this investigation. So again, let me bring this image up to sort of full size. Again, are they really paying attention to this apron at the bottom here? They seem to be very very focused on the window. And is that a fingerprint over there, or is that some kind of impression over there? Over there, is that something? And there do seem to be quite a few technicians around this particular window. 4 people, and she's shining a torch as well. Who knows? So if you follow where we've been coming from, we asking about seeing in the dark, and then we're saying, well, was there any evidence left at the front door apron where the killer could have entered or exited, or the sliding door apron, same thing, and then also the windows. And I think we know that there was no forced entry, so I don't think they're going to find forced entry signs at any of the windows. But another question that does arise is, were any of the windows broken? We know there were other broken locks inside the house, Xana's room, for example. Were there any others? And then the question comes up, is there anywhere else outside that we would need to look at, or anywhere else outside that investigators looked at? Was there anywhere else outside that it appeared that they found something and left behind crime scene markers? What do you think they are talking about in this scene where the officer seems to be directing everyone's attention to somewhere? What do you think they're actually thinking about from this particular perspective? Thanks very much, Pooh's Blustery Day. Thank you. Appreciate it. Don't you think they are thinking about just how much visual access all the houses around this particular house have to the kitchen and everything behind them? Don't you think that's what they're talking about? You can see right into this house from all of these other houses. Don't you think that's what these officers are saying? Also, if you look at this fence over here, it's not really obstructing anything. The fence doesn't provide any privacy. You can see right through the fence. There's no garden really, or trees or shrubs or anything that's interfering with your ability to see the kitchen and balcony and into some of the bedroom areas of the house from that elevation side, right? From this perspective. Let's go back. there's nothing interfering with line of sight from this perspective, from this side, right? And coincidentally, this side as well. The front perspective and that side perspective are totally unopposed. You can see into here, into this area. I don't want to say for miles, but certainly for maybe as much as half a mile, maybe even further. You can see a long way away, unopposed, all the way up to here. And certainly when you're in front over here, you can see this all very clearly. There's nothing interfering with your view of that. Isn't that what these officers are sort of talking about over here? And so was there any residues or artifacts of the criminal left behind over here? Did they find any trace of him going around the back over here, going around the perimeter of this fence, going around sort of up that way, kind of along a path here and around there? Ashley Banfield sort of mentioned that. Did they find anything like that? Thanks, Liesl. Appreciate it. Liesl, you must still let me know about you know what. Okay, so let's move on to the next thing. So there again, there they are next to that fence. And do you think they found any really useful evidence outside? Did the killer go out this way or out the front way? Did the killer make a circuit? Did the killer go right round the house on foot, or did he drive around the house first? This is another really good image from this rear side, from the elevated parking lot. I showed it to you guys previously. Really good image. Look at, you've got 4 investigators standing there, and they, what do you think they are pointing at? And what do you think that they, what is the focus of their thinking in this particular respect? They seem to be pointing kind of in the air and away from the house. I don't know if it's a drone or that they're looking at, or they seem to be looking beside the house in the air. Although this investigator here seems to be, his hand seems to be pointing towards one of the bedrooms. So maybe they're wondering whether there's any line of sight from any high building, any structure nearby, that would afford some sort of view to the house from that sort of part of town. So kind of in sum, you know, how much evidence was there really to be found outside, whether it's out the front door, out the sliding door, or on the periphery of the house itself? And what you're kind of seeing here is all in the photographic dimension. It is what evidence was obvious. Shoe prints. Did somebody leave behind a handkerchief? Did someone leave behind maybe they wiped their nose and left a tissue or something behind? Did someone lose a shoelace that was covered in blood? Did a piece of hair or something fall anywhere along the evidence trail, or not? So I think it's interesting that, and this is kind of the bottom line, is I really have been wanting to emphasize this for a long time. It seems really interesting that it appears there was no blood trail through either the front door or the sliding door. And I think that already tells you an awful lot. So when you're trying to think, there's a ghost that we're looking for. Well, one of the reasons he's a ghost is because he wants to be. He doesn't want to be seen. And there's a little bit of a clue in that. This idea that he approaches the house as a lone wolf by himself in the dark. He knows how to get in. He knows where to go. He knows how to get in and out without being seen. That shows pretty good hunting skills. That also shows someone who knows things about tracking and also knows a thing or two about how do you cover your tracks, but in a hunting scenario. So like if you are hunting, do you wear certain clothes or not? If you are hunting, do you worry about things like wind direction and smell and other ambient aspects, right? So you do get a kind of literally a lone wolf scenario where someone knows enough to know to cover their tracks. And what does that tell you about their psychology? So you say, this is someone who was really emotional, was really upset, was really triggered and did this in a rage. Well, isn't there another side to that? That they were, despite all of that, they were able to control their emotions enough to clean up after them. Despite all of this feeling, they knew well enough to close the door behind them, and really pull off a crime that so far, I don't want to say the perfect murder because it's not, but pulled off a crime that is so far exceeded the efforts thus far to catch him. I don't think this person wore camo, but I'm pretty sure he wore dark clothing. And he used the darkness on purpose to hide inside, right? And as soon as you think about that, if the perpetrator wore dark clothing, well, then he's worried about being seen, but then he's also going to be worried about leaving evidence that can be seen. So if he's wearing dark clothing and he's hiding in the dark, he's also going to not want things that show who he is to be seen. He's going to want to hide that away as well. Does it make sense what I'm saying? So I think it's interesting that there are no footprints, no obvious blood trail leading outside the house, which is precisely the scenario we were presented with in the Amanda Knox case. And I'm kind of getting goose flesh just saying that because it's such an epiphany. I want to put this in chat. And in a way, what I'm doing now is I'm giving you one thread. So another way that you can see in the dark is you find one thread in the dark. This might be in a photo, and you pull on that thread and it takes you into a whole spider web of illuminated, enlightened, inspired seeing in the dark, right? You find one thread and not what you see, but what you don't see. You just ask a simple question. I would expect to see a blood trail coming out the house. Why don't I? Then you say, okay, but first check. Are you sure that there isn't one? Okay, well, let's go and spend a lot of time, and I have. I spent hours and hours looking at the CSI photos and trying to get proper photos of these concrete slabs, these sort of aprons in front of the front door and the sliding door. It's not easy to find. And then you relatively confirm. I mean, I don't know this for a fact, but it doesn't seem like there's been any confirmation of that or any interest in that. There's been no information from the authorities that the killer entered through X or Y door. So based just on that thought thread, it takes you to a thread that gets you through all of the rest of the noise. The fact that there's no footprints, it's actually shoe prints or obvious blood trail coming outside tells you that the killer did something inside. And I want to now take you back to the video of Brian Enton. And again, I want you to think about this not through the photographic dimension of, I'm just looking at what a photographer is showing me, where you look through that into the mind of the perpetrator, into his criminal psychology, into the night of November 13, in a deeply intuitive, deeply imaginative, but also multidimensional and multidisciplinary way of thinking about it. And you get that way of thinking when you've written dozens and dozens of books and you've interrogated and seen through the criminal psychology of crime scenes dozens of times. It teaches you to think that way. So let's go there. So no, it's not that. It's one of these. It's not that one. There it is, Brian Enton. Okay. Let's watch this again. So I don't know if you noticed at that moment, and you probably watched it a couple of times, one of the ways you see is by looking again and again and again, and then finally you start seeing something. You notice how they touch the door handle. You also notice how the first officer pauses and it looks like he cleans his feet on that grill. So that grill could also be, if there's something on the ground there, there could actually be blood traces that have gone down through that. If there's a place to clean your feet there. That may be also what the FBI office is talking about in terms of layers. But the other important thing to consider is what is happening when they approach the door. What's happening when they're just walking and approaching the door? It's an analogy in quite a few ways. It's an analogy in this guy has come prepared. There's something he wants to do, and he's brought a case to do that with. How is the killer dressed? How is the killer probably dressed? Did he have the knife just in his hand like this guy, just having something in his hand? Was he dressed more in black or what? What kind of footwear was he using? And then also in this respect, you can see they are leaving behind shoe prints, just walking to the door. And to what extent is what is on their shoes going to be carried into the house? And that takes you even further if you say, and I think there was a little bit of snow, and bear in mind it was at night. If there was moisture on the ground and if there was some stepping in snow, then that could attach to itself certain things which could then deposit in the bedroom, in the carpeting of the bedroom and the blankets of the bedroom. So that's one way that you can have transfer from outside to inside in terms of giving an idea of where the killer came from in terms of entering the house. What's the other thing I wanted to address? I've spoken previously of, was the door locked? Can you see them cleaning their feet over there? And then also, did the killer enter through the front door? If he did he then close it? If he did close the door, when he came back, did he leave it open? And in tandem with this, did he arrive the same way that he left? Did he arrive, go straight in, and then do whatever he was doing inside? And in this case, they took 20 minutes. How long was the killer inside? That was the kind of main thing I want to ask is, what's the main difference between this footage and if you were sitting there in a chair watching when the criminal passed you? Well, the main difference would have been yeah, you don't get that 20-minute interval. In the real life situation, there was an interval. How long was that? Was it 10 minutes? Was it 15 minutes? That's also important to know. If the vehicle arrived there, how long did it pause there? Did it drive around, or did he walk around, or was it both? When he went into the house, did he go directly in because he'd already driven around, or did he go in one way and come out another because he'd botched the actual crime? And I think there is a possible scenario where he literally went in through the front door and then came back out that same way. And maybe he did think that's the best way to get in, where they're not going to have any evidence of me. Because if he went around the other way, you could walk on that gravel and you could hear it. In other words, if you approach the house from another angle, in terms of your other senses, think about the hunter psychology of, I've got to approach my prey without waking them up, without disturbing them. If he'd approached the house from any other angle, so if he approaches from this angle, there's tar here and it's a hard surface, there was obviously not snow, then he doesn't really risk waking anyone up in these bedrooms or even over here. But if he approaches from some other angle, he could step on twigs or on gravel, all of this gravel over here. If he goes off the road and goes around here, he could wake up the people inside the house by stepping on gravel or twigs or leaves. So in terms of silence, what's the most silent way of approaching and entering the house? Isn't the answer through the front door? Because the front door, he knows the access code to, and he can walk towards it on a hard surface that doesn't have leaves or twigs, right? Does that make sense? Yeah, crunching leaves. So let's have a look at another image of the house. If I can find it. Like, if you imagine this officer, if you could actually play the audio of this officer walking around outside trying to extend the crime scene tape, don't you think he's going to be, you're just going to hear crunch, 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 crunch? So do you really think the killer came down here if someone was sleeping in that bedroom? Do you think, do you really think the killer approached through the sliding door if he had to walk over that gravel that's on either side of the apron where the kitchen is? Do you really think the killer approached from here or from there or from there? Why wouldn't he approach just from there? He arrives by car, parks here, but with his lights out. Maybe even parks slightly further down the road so that the sound of the engine isn't a priority or isn't an issue. And then he walks this distance, goes in, comes out, walks out again. Sound is also an issue here. You can kind of, I'm trying to find a proper image of the gravel on the outside, but you can kind of see it over there. It's not only gravel, it's gravel and leaves. Let's see if I can find a good image. I mean, we know what you're talking about, but I would like to show it to you anyway. House. I mean, these two images really capture it quite well. This one, right? So if you wanted to go in through that entrance, it's surrounded by gravel on all sides. Gravel over here and a lot of leaves over there. If you wanted to come from this side, gravel and leaves all the way over here. And so the best way of entering without making a noise would be sort of straight from the front and in the dark. And the other thing is you wouldn't be seen from this whole exposed area that you can see, all of the fraternities to that side. Let's bring it up to a bigger size. All of the fraternities that are on this side that can see very, very clearly all the way in here. You don't have any risk of being seen by them and being exposed by these lights. You would be seen inside and exposed by these lights in the same way that you saw those 4 kids walking by the lights. Well, something might see you. So can you see why this is actually a preferable entry point? Sound-wise, certainly. And then I want to show you one more image, which again from the side. It's this one. If you decide you're not going to go through the front door, then you are faced with crossing all of this terrain. And if you're not going to leave behind footprints, you're going to create sounds, moving all of this distance or moving whatever distance you are to get to that front door. That also kind of addresses this question, should you go around the house on foot and check whether anyone's awake, or can you literally just drive around and see inside a house that is like a glass house? Can you literally just drive around and see inside that way? I mean, honestly, how much more different is this house to this one? Are they really that different? I mean, look at that, floor to ceiling, almost glass. Again, on top of that, floor to ceiling glass. Okay, so let's come back to the point. As I say, the main thread that I want to kind of talk about is, why are there no shoe prints, like a blood trail, coming out the house either by the front door or the sliding door or anywhere? Why is that not the case? And then what does that tell us? And I think what it tells us is that the killer wanted to leave behind a scene that appeared to be plausible. So in other words, when he left very early, so like if he left at 3:30 in the morning or 4 in the morning, it wouldn't be very good if a survivor raised the alarm and said at, let's say, 4:45 or 4 o'clock, oh no, someone's been murdered, phone 911, and you kind of have a situation where the police are rushing to the scene, the crime's just happened, and the killer is still trying to get home. You wouldn't really want a situation like that, right? You wouldn't want a situation where someone gets up to go to the bathroom and the door's wide open and they see something. Also, they call the police. So why does he need to cover up something that he's done? Why not just commit the crime and leave and just leave it all just the way that he left it? Well, because he's got to get home, because he's got to get out, right? He's got to get back in the darkness, and it's not going to help if the cops are sort of moving to the crime scene. He needs to get back home before anyone sees him. It's the hunter completing his mission. I need to arrive there not being seen, execute the crime not being heard, and get out and get back home not being seen, right? And maybe even not heard either. I need to get back into my home not being seen by my housemates or not heard by my housemates. And one thing that, or parents, one thing that can prove possibly that someone went somewhere in the middle of the night was maybe the car was parked in a slightly different place the next morning. At night it was over there, the next morning it was slightly over there, right? Okay. In other words, and we get a big insight here. So this was a scenario we were presented with in the Amanda Knox case. Can I highlight this? Thanks a lot, Alex. Thanks a lot for that. This was a scenario we were presented with in the Amanda Knox case. I'm still surprised every single day that goes by that Amanda Knox doesn't really talk about this case, because it's about a knife crime, it's about students, it's about not really knowing who may have done something. I just find it quite fascinating in a way. So what was the scenario in terms of blood trail presented in the Amanda Knox case? Well, there's no blood trail outside. There was also someone who was viciously stabbed in her throat. There's a fantastic amount of blood. And there were shoe prints. But how come they didn't go all the way out the house? What do you think the answer is to that? And like, if you guys don't know this, there were shoe prints in Meredith's room. There were actually shoe prints coming out of her room. There were even footprints, but you couldn't really see those very carefully. They were there, but you couldn't see them very carefully, which is why they used luminol. Okay, so the answer to that is the idea was that the house looked plausible on the outside. And so that's exactly the case here as well, which makes me wonder, did the killer actually leave through the sliding door? Because leaving the door open maybe wasn't such a good idea. Or maybe he left so quickly he didn't quite make sure to close the door. Beauty with thorns things, I don't think it's that hard. Especially for someone who's thought about it. Okay, so in the Knox case, the house was also plausible. What I mean by plausible is it passes the eye test. You look and you don't really see those details. It passes the photographic dimension test, right? Let's just put that word up just to see what we're talking about. So plausible means something that looks reasonable, something that just looks in another way ordinary. I'm kind of using a little license using that word, right? I think the better word is that it doesn't look implausible. Right? It doesn't look like there's anything sinister going on. So let me just read what I've written here. I think it's interesting that no footprints, no obvious blood trail leads outside of the house, which is precisely the scenario we were presented with in the Amanda Knox case. Closed doors, and interestingly in that case, the front door was also open, and ostensibly a house that presents itself as plausible on the outside. Now, in the Amanda Knox case, I suppose you could say that the killer left in such a hurry, he left the front door open. But you could also argue that maybe whoever committed the crime wanted to allow the door open, that it could be anyone who went in there. So the front door is open, suggesting that basically that whatever's inside is contaminated because the door's open. In other words, the crime scene hasn't been secured, and the front door being open shows that. It shows someone who doesn't live there committed a crime. Now, one does wonder whether that psychology applies here. Is someone trying to show that someone who didn't live there committed the crime? I don't know if that's overthinking it. Maybe it is. And then that brings us to the following. In the Knox case, the house was plausible on the inside as well, meaning that even if you went inside the house, you wouldn't really notice anything out of place. You wouldn't think that someone had been murdered. Do you think that was the same with this house? Do you think if you entered this house after the murders, you went through that door, do you think you would also get the sense that it was plausible, meaning everything was in order? Because that's the sense we get from the roommates, was that they woke up and the only thing they thought might be wrong was, what do you call it, that someone was unconscious. So doesn't that suggest there wasn't a blood trail to the front door either, or through the kitchen either? So there's not going to be blood. It's not like, oh no, we better open this door, there's blood, right? Don't you get the sense that through a certain part of the house there wasn't any blood either? In other words, either through this front door or upstairs from this point through the kitchen door. And so I actually think someone's unconscious. Maybe they're hungover. I don't think someone was murdered. I mean, there's no evidence of that. There's no blood. You see, and all of that comes from that first point where you say, why is what we should expect to find a blood trail outside? Why isn't that there? And now you are able, through that thinking style, to step actually behind that door and say, yeah, but then there also wasn't a blood trail leading to the door from the inside, which then takes you even further. Then you say, was there any blood on the bottom floor, what one officer referred to as the basement? It's not really the basement, the ground floor, the parking area, the area where the front door was. Was there any blood on that floor? And I would wager to say probably not. And if you say that, then doesn't that mean the killer went into the bathroom, either of the top floor or the middle floor or both, but very likely the middle floor in particular? Because I think that's where he finished committing the crime. That he went into the bathroom of the second floor. He could even have gone into the kitchen, but let's say bathroom, and cleaned himself. Maybe he even put some of his clothing into a plastic bag, who knows? But cleaned himself, washed his hands, stepped onto towels or whatever. That's what you have in bathrooms. And just in a way that would be enough that if he then stepped out from that point, you wouldn't really see anything. It probably would also include a little bit of mopping up on stairs and also on hallways. And we've seen inside the house, it looks like sort of laminate flooring. And so now you've got a really even more ominous picture of the ghost that we're talking about. We're getting a real sense that the ghost means to be a ghost. He means not to be seen. It's a lone wolf that is, on the one hand, very emotional and very triggered, but on another hand, really strategic. Someone who's, in a way, you could say, very emotional and lost control of his emotion, but in another way, very controlled enough in the middle of a crime scene to stop and wipe it away, in the middle of a crime scene to execute the crime so efficiently that the victims don't wake one another up, or not in a way that's going to interrupt his crime, right? So we've got a criminal here who's used darkness as a cover. He's used to being in the dark. He commits the crime in the shadows, and that allows him to be invisible. He's kind of a lone wolf coming out of the dark and attacking his prey in a way that it seems like he's done before. Well, how could he have done that before unless he's been a hunter? He doesn't leave behind a blood trail, which also seems to suggest that he knows about this idea of trail, leaving behind footprints, following footprints. You also get the idea that if he was able to commit this crime and deal with the panic of doing what he's doing and then wash his hands and cover his tracks, that he's actually been living with his emotions for a long time. Either that or he's a psychopath. I don't think he's a psychopath. So hasn't he been living with these emotions for a long time? I think he has. So he's triggered, but he's not unhinged. His rage is something he's lived for a while, and he's kept it caged. The crime itself is where he releases his rage, but it's also done in a measured way. It's a kind of emergency venting. He's also someone who doesn't get what he needs from family or friends. That's the impression I get, which reinforces he's a lone wolf. He does this, he commits this crime as revenge for perceived stabs to the heart for a long period of lots of rejections, what he perceives as humiliation. And then the question is, over what period of time, short term or long term? If it's short term, how short? If it's long term, how long? Is it 1 semester or 2? Is it a semester or 2 plus a backstory tied to that? So if we go to the Knox case, this is what a bloodied foot shoe print looks like. Now, let me ask you kind of a simple question. Is that what you would expect a bloodied shoe print to look like? It looks like this image was taken 1 or 2 days after the crime was committed. Is that what a bloodied shoe print, is that what you'd expect it to look like? Any thoughts? There you go. Does it look like someone literally stepped into blood and then stepped out of it? Someone says the plasma waters it down. Let me say that again. Does it look like someone stepped into blood, a pool of blood, and then just literally stepped out of it? So it wouldn't be this pink and sort of watered down. It would be much redder. It wouldn't be this kind of semi-transparent. It would be a much darker, redder color than what you're seeing here. So what this seems to show is that there was already water involved in this, right? That's not what it should look like. And there are other blood traces in the crime scene that you can see are like very light pinks, right? And then, but you can see there's a whole spectrum. There's bright red blood, and then there's transparent, very light pink as well. And then there are other traces of the shoe prints going out the house that are virtually invisible. This is the kind of thing you probably can expect to find inside the crime scene as well. It does. But I mean, there's no question what you're seeing here is a shoe print. It's left by a shoe on the ground, and the agent used to make this print was the victim's blood. So this is not just anyone who entered the house. This is the killer's shoe. So in terms of the Amanda Knox case, there were shoe prints, but but they were all inside Meredith's room, and the few that were outside were very, very hard to see. If you look a little bit to the right of this image, there's the shoe print. That is actually the side of Meredith Kurtz's bra, which is actually cut with a knife. It was also removed. Thanks a lot, Richardson. Thanks a lot. So let me repeat what I said earlier. In the Knox case, the house was plausible on the inside, but not inside Meredith's room. But then there was also what appeared to be staging inside Meredith's room. Meredith seemed to be moved from where she was killed to somewhere else, and then a blanket was placed over her. And there also seemed to be smudge marks and clothing and all sorts of, the crime scene did seem to be changed. Are we going to see something like that here? So what you're seeing is a washed out bloody shoe print, but nevertheless a bloody shoe print. There were also in Amanda Knox case, there were also bloody footprints. So how can you have shoe and footprints in blood at a crime scene where the door was closed and locked? Just think about that. And you can apply that same thing to this case. I don't know whether they found footprints, I doubt it. But just think about that idea. How could you find shoe and footprints in blood at a crime scene where the door, where inside the door where Meredith was found was actually closed and locked? But then they found shoe prints inside and a bloody footprint outside. So that's just really important to bear in mind. So how do we have our light bulb moment in terms of everything that I've told you? So in the John Benet Ramsey case, there was a shoe print as well, a high-tech print found in the dust of the wine cellar. You guys know that. That's one of the most overlooked items of evidence in the entire case because it's a signature of the killer. Another signature is the actual ransom note. It's another one of the most overlooked items of evidence in the Ramsey case because the killer actually, not the killer, the criminal associated with the case, literally in their own hand wrote something and through that showed who they were, right? In other words, left behind a signature of themselves. So what's our light bulb moment in terms of this? Let me make this full screen, just like that. What's our light bulb moment? The shoe print is the ghost's foot. And we are almost guaranteed that we are going to get a shoe print in this case. So you're looking for a ghost and you say, this is impossible. There's no way, you know what, this case is going to go cold. I don't know where to start. Maybe you want to start by looking for a shoe print. That's the ghost's foot. That's the ghost's signature that he left behind and maybe tried to some extent to remove, and maybe did remove it up to the front door and that floor. Do you think that he removed every single shoe print he left in 2 bedrooms? So can I share with you guys, and I quite like the fact that I've got this light bulb moment. Can I share with you guys a little story, and it's related to what I'm saying now? When I was at advertising school, on our very first day there, the lecturers told us, can each of you guys remove one shoe and send it forward? So the whole class, I think we were maybe about 15, 20 students, took off their shoes, handed it to the kid next to you, and they sent it forward, right? And this is the shoe that I'm wearing right now. Right, there's my shoe. And then they put all the shoes into kind of a basket, and then they said they would take a shoe out the basket and hold it up. And then they would say, whose shoe is this? But not the student who it is. They would say, here is someone's shoe in this class. Who do you think it is? And describe that person to us. And so you'd have a variety of shoes. Is it a guy's shoe or is it a girl's shoe? Is she spoiled? Is she sporty? Is she a girly girl? Is it a guy? Is it a boot? Is it a sporty guy? Is it a sort of a prissy metasexual guy? And so this was at my advertising school on day one, where they basically said, based on the shoe, how much could you tell about a person? And how much is your own shoe communicating about who you are, right? Well, the exact same thing applies here. If you've got the shoe print, you've probably got the shoe. And if you've got the shoe, you've actually got an awful lot already. You've got the ghost's foot, but you've got the size and to some extent the personality of the wearer that's revealed. So the size of the shoe is going to tell you, are you dealing with a 10-year-old or are you dealing with an adult? Are you dealing with a small person or a big person? In the John Benet Ramsey case, it was the question of, did a police officer leave that print, or did a boy leave that print? Did a child leave that print? Shoe prints can reveal broadly who our killer is, whether he's a male or female, sporty or military, big or small, rich. So, for example, if the shoe tread appears to be brand new, if it seems to be a new shoe, or if he's poor or not very, very wealthy, he may have old shoes with a worn tread. Maybe it's worn on one side. And then also likely if he's old versus young, all of those things. In the O.J. Simpson case, they appeared to find a shoe tread that was very, very idiosyncratic. It was telling you that whoever left this tread is a quite an unusual individual. It's not anybody, right? And that, I think that information only came out at the civil trial. So one wonders if it had come out at the actual trial, the criminal trial, whether you would have had a what's the word, an unambiguous, unescapable evidence situation. One just wonders about that. So let's have a look at this. The shoe can tell you if it's a male or female based on the size, also the width of it, whether the individual's sporty or military or got some other specialist inclination, whether he's big or small, whether he's rich or poor, and then also whether it's like an older person or a younger person. Our shoe choices change as we age. They become more practical. But also, if you're very young and maybe you're sporty, you may also have quite a practical shoe choice. Did the person who committed this crime wear shoes that when they walk on particular surfaces, they don't make a noise? Because that would be, I think, quite a specialist kind of shoe as well. So that's the one aspect that allows us to see in the dark and see the ghost in the darkness, is being able to see his shoe print, right? And very, very likely there is a shoe print. And then the other thing that can allow us to see in the dark is DNA, specifically a mixed DNA sample that can reveal the actual killer in terms of who he is on the inside. Shoe prints and DNA are not in the photographic dimension. Do you guys agree with that? So if you say, what are we not seeing, and why is this such a mystery? We'll look at it through a different dimension. Okay, let's look through the windows. Let's look at the Hyundai in Oregon. No, you're still seeing it through the photographic dimension. Let's look at through the microscopic and that plane. Let's look at those horizontal slabs. Instead of seeing the house like that, let's see it like that. What did the killer literally lay down with his own feet? So do you guys agree with that? That shoe prints and DNA are typically not in the photographic dimension? I mean, shoe prints can be quite obvious sometimes, but when last did you notice a shoe print in your everyday life? When last did you notice, oh, there's a shoe print? Unless you were on a beach recently or in mud, it's probably been a while. We are surrounded in our lives with hard surfaces, and so we don't really see that sort of thing. Okay. What's the time? I think I've got half an hour before the power goes out here. 9/11 people watching at the moment. 9/11 is quite interesting. So I would notice a thing like that. Someone said, we love Nick, our teacher. That's a sweet comment. Thanks a lot, world-class someone. Thanks a lot for that, although your avatar's a little bit bizarre. Yeah, no, you would definitely notice a shoe print dipped in blood, but when last did you just notice shoe prints in your everyday life? I'm just saying it's not in our everyday dimension. It's a less obvious thing, which is why you need to think in a different dimension, right? Okay, so now I want to take our thinking into just a very obvious area, and I think having a dog helps you. If you're a person, you walk with your dog, you see how a dog sees things in a totally different dimension. The dog sees things through its nose. And I was having breakfast with a friend yesterday morning, actually with a bottle of champagne, just celebrating the whole 100K thing. And I mentioned to her, can you see how when Timmy thinks, his nostrils sort of go like that. He thinks with his nose. He sees with his nose. And I can't tell you how many times I've driven in my car with Timmy, or I've walked with Timmy and I've said, Timmy, there's a cat. Timmy, look. And then he looks everywhere except where the cat is. Sometimes the cat's right in front of him. Why is that? Because a dog doesn't see with his eyes, and he's actually got really bad eyesight. So many times I've walked with Timmy and a cat's been right there, and the cat is very clever. It sits completely still, and as long as it's still, the dog can come really, really close to the cat and not see it. As soon as the cat moves, he can't be seen. He can be seen. So the cat's aware of a dog's weakness, which is that his eyes are really, really poor, fascinatingly poor. His scent, a dog is a scent creature. A cat is more of a visual creature, although it can smell quite well as well. Cat can also hear quite well. But compared to a dog, a cat is far more of a visual animal. A cat, its eyes are a cat and an owl are very, very visual hunters. A dog isn't a visual hunter. A dog is a pack animal, but a scent animal as well. And when you are with a dog, walking with a dog, you see how a dog sees through the dimension of smell, where a dog arrives at a particular point and he sees that another dog has been there when there's no dog there. He smells the dog's residue, and he smells sorts of other things. When I drive with my dog in the car and I open the window, my dog puts his head out the window and he's just going like this, and he's smelling who knows what. Who knows what smells are in that ether passing by when you're going at some speed in a vehicle. But the point is, he is able to enter a dimension that we can't, that we don't. And I play a little game with my dog. If I think that's a little bit oversharing, but the other aspect is he can travel through time and say, this person was here, or I know where you went to because I recognize the smells of that and that dog on you, or that person on you, right? And we need to do the same thing, but through the other tools that we've got, right? It's the tools of criminal psychology, and the one of the quick routes to that, to sniffing our way to the criminal psychology, is what I call true crime intertextuality. You use the patterns and so on of other cases to find your way into this. In this case, we've looked at the Amanda Knox case, sometimes the John Benet Ramsey case. Stacey says, did the dog know the killer's smell then? It raised a really interesting question, is did they bring dogs to this crime scene to find a scent, to find a signal that was maybe upstairs and out? And I think the answer is no. I don't think they even tried. Maybe because they thought it was contaminated, but I think it was worth a try. I think dogs, more than many other things, are underestimated tools in true crime and need to be used more often. And think about how dogs could have actually helped potentially in the Kylie Rodney case. Cadaver dogs should have been able to have found her if they'd done a perimeter search of that lake. They should have been able to find her. A good cadaver dog should have been able to find her. So what are a couple of other things? So yeah, if we recognize that we are poor seers, that seeing in the visual plane, in other words, you're looking for someone and you can't find them, stop looking in obvious ways. You know, if something's not working, stop doing that. You're not going to get a different result. Look in a different way. And so in terms of the poll, how should you look for a ghost in the dark? In the beginning, you can try paying attention. In the beginning, you can look at the details. In the beginning, you can try and allow your eyes to adjust, but ultimately, you need to think in a different dimension. And what is so amazing is in thinking in a different direction is how quickly evidence lights up, how effective thinking in a different dimension is. Using luminol, using the targeted searching of DNA, all is extremely effective. Using scent in the terms of scent dogs, very, you get signals like that in the way that some kind of investigator with a camera, not saying that that's not useful, but an investigator in a camera has got a very limited visual plane to work with ultimately. So the first step to seeing what we can't see is recognizing that we can't see very well, just like a dog can't see very well. Use your other perception skill. So for a dog, it is scent. But the first step is recognizing that, you know what, we can't actually see very well. So we need to begin the process of thinking strategically, which is to say thinking differently, which is to say in a different dimension. Does that make sense? This is a photo taken by Brian Enton of the scene in Moscow. And I've got to agree with him and just say, it seems like a beautiful little town. I wouldn't mind going there. Like where I live isn't anything as pretty as this. Snow, Christmas lights, really looks quite delightful. It reminds me a little bit of Boulder at Christmas, maybe even better than Boulder. So to be completely honest with you guys, I would have preferred to have put all of this narration that has taken me 2 hours, 20 minutes into a single episode that maybe would have taken 20 minutes for you to watch, but it would have taken probably 4 hours, 3 or 4 hours to get all the right images and to sync it. And I would prefer to do that. I prefer to do that, but the power's going out here in 20 minutes. I would have run out of time. I didn't really want to wait till tomorrow to do that. But I prefer not doing lives. I prefer the whole thing where you do triple the amount of work, really. You've got to get so much of the photos that you're looking for, and then you've got to sync it to the audio at the same time. And when it is quite a long script, like this is quite a long script to research and write, every additional minute takes like an additional 5 or 10 or 20 minutes to sync to the script. And in that time, it's just a heck of a lot of time to do. But I do want to ask you guys, you can maybe leave it in the comments. Would you prefer that I did that I took an extra day to do shorter, tighter, scripted videos that are synced, where you don't see my face and it's not this sort of somewhat clumsy way of getting to the certain checkpoints? But yeah, in other words, would you prefer, what do you guys think about that? In other words, maybe rather do 4 or 5 episodes a week and then one live. Because the other side of it is a live takes 2.5 hours. In that time, I could have done another video as well. I could have put up another video, a 10-minute video kind of thing. Is there a final thing that I wanted to share with you? So we are very used to thinking in a fragmented, disconnected way. When I started writing all of these books, I realized just how naturally we think in a very random, fragmented, we're taught to think that way. And we need to train ourselves to think in an integrated, cohesive, connected way. Right? We need to train ourselves to make connections and to think in patterns and to think within a system and a systematic way, in a methodical approach. You may think of a case as you start wide, but you cast your the crime scene tape of your mind as a very wide net right in the beginning. And then from there, you narrow it down. You don't start narrow and speculate wider and wider. And a lot of YouTubers do that. You start wide and you narrow it down. In this case, in this analysis, I've really been taking a long time to tell you about one thing, shoe prints. It's a very narrow thing. It's a very narrow thing, where a shoe print can actually identify the perpetrator. Thanks a lot, Terry. And by the way, that has come up today in the news, where they say, see if I can find it. In the news, they've said, experts caution public against a rush to judgment as police pursue every lead. Are they narrowing it down, though? Are they narrowing down their search? Here's another video. Police chief leading investigation says families aren't being excluded. And then if you play this, it actually shows some of the evidence value, I think. No, that was the other video. Okay, so I think that is it for today. That is it for today. I hope you found this useful. Think about the same thing in terms of your personal life. How can you think in a different dimension about yourself? In other words, stop thinking only through emotions. Try to think scientifically about what you're doing. Try to think about the whole of your life and the narrative arc of your life. Think of your life as a narrative. How do you want to start a new page or a new chapter? Would you want to write a new book in terms of how you're living your life? How can you rise through the canopy of the noise of your life and relationships and realize where you are and where you want to go? It's the same thing. Right? Think through a different dimension if you are feeling a bit lost. Thanks a lot, world class something. Thanks a lot, Jeffrey. Thanks a lot for that. I don't think they like, I don't think mainstream media like my voice very much. I think they think I'm the most Van Gogh voice in true crime, which maybe I am. Okay, so the power is going to go out in 15 minutes. There were so many other things that I wanted to share with you guys, but ran out of time a little bit. This is the challenge. Converting data to knowledge, that's in terms of this investigation. Converting all of those tips to knowledge, all of the forensic evidence to knowledge. But knowledge alone is not going to cut it. You've got to convert that knowledge. So it's data to knowledge, knowledge to evidence, and the evidence to a legally actionable case. That's the challenge. And that's a process that takes time. It's a process to convert data to knowledge through all of that testing. It takes time to think. It takes time to process, and social media is very impatient when it comes to that. Did I miss someone? Marsha Steelman, love listening to you. Thanks for that, Marsha. And Deborah, thank you as well. There are two Deborahs on here as well. Thanks very much, Deborah. What can I leave you guys with? Let's have a look at a search for the latest news, and then I'm going to let you guys go. Is there any latest news? 8 hours ago, experts caution against a rush to judgment. Footage shows cops break up a party. We've seen that. Police chief leading investigation says the families aren't being excluded. I've already touched on that. 2 hours ago, university to offer self-defense classes. So nothing really new. Nothing really new. So I haven't forgotten about talking about reaching the 100K milestone. I just feel like I've got a lot of work I want to get through before I do that, and that's going to take a little bit of time. I want to go through some of the videos that I've done over the past life of this channel, and like where I'm some of my very first lives, and you'll see how my appearance has actually transformed and how the background behind me has also changed. And then, so I haven't forgotten about that. I just feel like it's not a big priority right now. I know it's important to you guys, and I really celebrate getting to 100K with you. It's our achievement, it's not my achievement, it's ours. And I really appreciate your love and support and loyalty and friendship. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot, Elise. Thanks a lot. Yeah, I reached 100,000 like yesterday. Once you reach 100,000, it doesn't show 0.1, 0.2 like for hundreds anymore. it only counts the next time you hit 1,000. So that's something that's quite new. Stephanie says, I read it, then was like, oh, what do you mean by that? Thanks a lot, All Honey. Thanks for that. Not everyone does. I've heard that I sound like an old 70-year-old Indian. I've heard that a couple of times. Songbird says, I was at your first live, lol, you were nervous. To be honest, I'm kind of nervous and stressed before every live. And I feel very conflicted because I want to be a very effective communicator. And I feel like these lives aren't very effective unless I ignore you guys completely and just read my script. And so maybe I'll do that in futures. I'll record myself reading a script and then make that into a video and then do that as part of a live. I know some channels do that. But I just feel like that's adding another level of delay. But yeah, definitely something to consider. Why be so nosy? Well, in order to solve crimes. But that's a cool avatar. Thanks a lot for that. Merry Christmas. I forgot last time for Timmy to make his appearance, but this time, here he is. Timmy, what you doing? He's smelling something. Timmy, you're being very rude. Come, go for a walk. Do you want to go for a walk? Hmm? Do you want to go for a walk? Can you see how his nose sniffs? Timmy, do you want to go for a walk? Hmm? Go for a walk. They also say with a dog, they are healthy if their noses are wet. Have you noticed that? And that smelling works when, with a dog anyway, when their noses are wet. That they need a wet surface to smell. It's almost like the tongue is a wet thing that it's got to be wet in order for it to taste. Have you ever had your tongue be very, very dry? Maybe you dehydrated or something, but for whatever reason, your mouth is extremely dry. You can't really taste so well. Just also an interesting observation. It's a miniature schnauzer. He's approaching 3 years old. It's actually quite scary. That is almost 3. K-Bay says, my dog says you say walk and he goes crazy. My dog, I've unfortunately, sometimes I say, do you want to go for a walk? And then I end up sitting down and working. And I've done that enough times that he's like, to him, the signal that he's going for a walk is the jingle of my keys. Sometimes if I put my shoes on, but the jingle of my keys are like, take your marks, get set, go, and he's out the door. So he's learned that the signal in the noise isn't, do you want to go for a walk? It's the key sound. Quite a clever dog. Sometimes if I say, do you want to go for a walk, he does get excited, but he's learned it's sometimes a false flag. Cat's Real, My Life Mystic Tarot says you are very informed and prepared. Thanks a lot. I noticed on another channel, I don't think it was on the channel, it was about that channel. Someone left a comment saying, you are the only one who prepares every single day. And I thought, geez, I do. Every single day I write a script. More than one, in fact. I don't present every single script I write, but there are quite a few channels that prepare every single day. Just something that I noticed. Any brother or sister for Timmy? No, probably not. He did have a cat as a sister, but that ended in divorce. Oh, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, miniature schnauzers are really amazing dogs, very loving, very cute as well. but somewhat high maintenance. You've got to shave them every 2-3 months, and they do need quite a lot of love, I think. I think that's really true of any dog. Is there any so I want to play out by replaying Mary O'Connell's statement about the shoe. I want to play out with that, and then end off. I think I've got 5 minutes to go before the power goes out here. By the way, I don't know what other creators spend money on, but I'm probably going to be paying for solar power so that I can simply keep my lights on, right? So I don't know what other creators do with their income, but I know what I'm going to be doing is buying a system that allows me to simply keep the electricity on. Yeah, so there you have it. Is that ready now? So again, I want you to listen to what this FBI agent says. She says that she was in the area. She says that she spoke to law enforcement. And I don't think she brings up shoe prints for nothing. I think that was a topic of conversation between herself and the FBI and Ali, right? That's the impression I get. So I'm going to play out with that. And please pay attention to it. Listen carefully. I want to thank all you guys who are here. I want to thank the new subscribers. Welcome to the channel. Welcome to this community. Yeah, we try to keep it real. We are, I think, quite a sensible and intelligent community, and we're not sort of given to being sensational or anything like that. And we like to think that we are quite an authentic, not just channel, but we're an authentic group of people. And in that way, we differentiate ourselves from kind of everybody else. So thank you all for being here. Thank you to the new subscribers. Thank you for all the super chats today. And I hope you guys have, Susan says, I'm spoiled. I hope you guys have a really good sleep. Those who are about to bed down, I'm about to start my day. So sweet dreams wherever you are. Marcus, if you're watching this, I will try and do the 100K celebratory thing at a time where you'll be awake, because I know it's been irritating you that it's not when you're awake, all of these lives. So we'll do it in a way that will try and be at a time suitable to you and the folks in Europe and in the UK and maybe Australia as well, Bria as well. I would love to have Bria. Oh, Marcus is here. Okay. That's quite funny. Well, I guess it is quite late. It's not late. It's not too early in the morning for you to cover this. So anyway, good to see you. But the point is, I think, Marcus, you'll be able to watch that without getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning. So don't worry about that. Thanks also to our mods who are awesome and dedicated and sweet and really cool people. So thanks a lot, Stephanie, Terry Dean. There you are. And also SM Kovalinsky, as usual, just a great a friend of this channel, asset to this channel. Mel Stiller, Yvonne, Deborah 1 and Deborah 2, Susan. Is Sharon still here? I think I saw you a few moments ago. But thanks to all of you guys. You guys must have a good sleep. Remember, Christmas is coming. Remember to spend some time with your families. Start setting aside time for a very special time of the year. If you're going to celebrate Christmas, or if you're going to celebrate my channel, raise a glass of bubbly and think of us and toast us at your family celebrations. We'll toast you guys as well. So yeah, cool. So that is it from my side. I'm probably going to do a much shorter version of the script as a separate video. I didn't actually quite say what I wanted to say in the way I wanted to say it, which is often how these lives go. Elise says, thanks, Nick. Merry Christmas. Cool. To Helen and back. Yeah, as you say, to those who celebrate, Merry Christmas. To those who don't, Happy Hanukkah or whatever. Happy days, happy holidays. Okay, so let's play out with this former FBI agent. And again, just notice what she says about layers of evidence and then ultimately shoe prints.
And I spoke at length to Kaylee's parents, and they've been informed that the investigation is moving in the right direction. And I really love to hear that. And while we were there, we told them how much these law enforcement officers want to give them good news. And that was really comforting to them, and a really, obviously, just extraordinarily sad time. There are things that are happening right now. There are some things that are slowing things down. For example, finals were Friday night, so the whole town is pretty much empty. And in order to have an in-person interview or, talk to someone again, normally the cops would just go out right to their house and bring them in and talk to them. But in this particular instance, they're having to send leads to either FBI offices or to local police departments throughout the country where these kids, went home for the holidays. So there are a lot of things that are causing this thing to slow down, and a lot of them have also to do with the forensic evidence that they took into custody. Apparently, this evidence was actually layered, which is very difficult to work with and pull apart and put into its own little bucket. Where, for example, if the shoe impressions with snow and dirt and rocks and blood all have to be separated out and tested. So there are just so many moving parts, but them working in the right going in the right direction meant a lot to me.